Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and the death of Stanley Robinson. Now, the cause of his death has not been divulged or disclosed as of yet, but Stanley Robinson was a former NCAA basketball player. He was a legend, basically. My understanding is at least a fairly illustrious career in college basketball with the UConn Huskies team. Now, I believe he also played professional basketball as well. You'd have to look that up and verify that on the internet. But anyway, I'm going to talk about some placements in his chart and some transits that may have been tied in to his passing. Sadly, now I think it was his mother that had discovered him in at home, being deceased, and it's just terrible. The first thing I want to do, though, is offer my condolences to the friends and to the family of Stanley Robinson if they do happen to see this video. And the first thing I'm looking at, as far as it's a natal, what's transit I'm looking at, the sun had just entered Leo, and the sun rules the heart, and Leo does rule the heart in stroke as well, and it would be hitting his first house in his solar sunrise chart. I need to be kind and rewind that his birthday is July 14th, 1988, born in Birmingham, Alabama, according to Wikipedia.org. I had to improvise once again and do a solar/sunrise chart because the time of birth I could not find online. The solar sunrise time and chart puts the sun at 22 degrees Cancer. Now, some people see the 22nd degree regardless of the sign it's in. It could be a negative or adverse degree. Could be one of maybe perhaps some tribulation. The sun, of course, is associated with the physical body. At this time, he had transit sun in Leo is hitting the first house in the solar sunrise chart. First house could be connected with the physical body. The sun can be associated with the heart, and being in the zodiac sign Leo, it's a sign associated with the heart as well. I would not be surprised if this was some kind of heart attack or stroke that had taken place at this time. I would hate to think that it may be a suicide, but I mean, even just common sense and knowing, understanding when people die. I mean, astrology out of the way. The fact is, if somebody dies at the age of 32, somebody dies at a relatively young age, you figure it's not natural causes. It's something that came. Obviously, this is something that came through some debilitation, or it could have been through suicide, is another possibility. I mean, he does have at this time the transit north node in Gemini is not far from the natal Chiron in this 12th house in the solar sunrise chart. Remember that Chiron is not just about uh, emotional wounds and suffering. Sometimes it can manifest in physical wounds as well. Chiron in his natal chart is conjunct his Mercury as well. So this could be, I mean, sometimes this could be about thoughts of some kind of, I mean, it could be about thoughts of some kind of suffering in some cases. Um, I don't know if he had anything as far as mental situation, like mental illness. I mean, it does. The fact when you have Chiron conjunct Mercury in your natal chart can certainly increase that propensity for that. And he has Mercury in Cancer. Mercury in Cancer, I have this placement too. Mercury in Cancer can become very despondent and melancholy just regarding the world's problems in general, things of could be of a global nature, and even their own problems as well. He does have Chiron conjunct that, and that could add to some suffering, perhaps associated with that. It's in the 12th house of secret sorrows in the solar sunrise chart. You have transit north node there being fairly close proximity to this energy. When you're talking about the north node in transit, it can manifest in issues one may have to address or confront. So it's just something I'm thinking of as a possibility. I hope he wasn't becoming overly despondent regarding his own life and committed suicide. But it's something that I don't know at this present time, and I'm sure it will become more available by tomorrow. I'm sure we'll have likely elaborate as far as the cause of death, but it has not been divulged or disclosed at this point in time. Another thing I noticed, he has Pluto in Scorpio in the fourth house in the solar sunrise chart. So it's not surprising his mother did find him. I mean, as far as his death, it took place in the home. He was found in his home. And the fact that it's in Scorpio, I hope this was not a murder. I mean, something tells me that it was not a murder, but he was found dead in his home according to reports on the internet. Now, another thing that I noticed too is that the ruler of the fourth house in the solar sunrise chart is okay. The sign on the cusp of it is Libra. The ruler Venus in Gemini is not far from the 12th house. That could be an indicator of the end of life connected with suicide, or it could be something where just simply it's an indicator where that end or latter part of one's life, there might be some restrictions in connection with it, because when you look at the latter part of life, it's really, you look at it maybe perhaps roughly from age 50 to the time you pass, and the fact that he died at the age of 32 is an indicator that obviously he did not really enter what is supposed to be that latter part of one's life, based on what the average age is, whether it's around somewhere near 75. I don't know the precise age as far as longevity is on average, but I would think it would be around between 75, 79 years old. So when you're entering that latter part of your life, I would put it at approximately 50 years old, and that was denied, sadly. And when you have the ruler of the fourth house either in the 12th house or it's conjuncted even from the 11th, it could be an indicator of that latter part of life having some kind of restriction connected with it. Now, another thing that I noticed too, now he does have in the solar sunrise chart Uranus is conjunct Saturn in Sagittarius, so it's not surprising that he did something in this, as far as sports related, where he had some unusual ability for it and made perhaps a career out of it. I do believe he played professional to some degree, but you do have to, I would confirm that online and look up to make sure. And another thing too is that with Neptune, even though this is a solar sunrise chart, Neptune is in the sixth house as well. I'm hoping that there wasn't any issues with drugs at this time. The ruler of one of the rulers of his eighth house, okay, he has in his eighth house cusp of death, the zodiac sign Aquarius falls on it. That by itself can sometimes indicate a very spontaneous, shocking, alarming, very startling, unexpected kind of death, an unusual kind of death. And the fact that that ruler falls in the sixth house, it can, in some cases, this could manifest in a death due to a debilitating or illness that may have been chronic. One of those rulers, though, is that it is Uranus, and it makes at the least a long conjunction to Neptune. And Neptune can be associated with chemicals and drugs and alcohol. I'm hoping that this did not play a role in his death, but it does increase that possibility. Now, really not much more as far as this goes, and as far as his passing. Another thing is that the fact that transit Sun was also conjunct his moon in Cancer, based on the solar sunrise chart. That could be, where it's not surprising that he came out, that there was something where he was going to be out, as far as publicly at this time, shining the light on something of a coming out publicly, because you're talking about the sun can shine the light, so to speak, be the spotlight. The moon is the public, so it's not surprising that something happened where he was put in the spotlight and in the public, thrust into the public again at this point in time. The moon is the ruler in the solar sunrise chart. It's the ruler of the first house cusp, the zodiac sign Cancer, and the sun is hitting it. So that's an indicator that something, it could be of a physical nature, had affected him at this time. I would not be surprised if this was something of a very early, heart attack or stroke, or there could have been something from heat or some kind of exhaustion or overexertion, because you're talking about the transit sun in the zodiac sign Leo. Leo, of course, could be very, it's a sign that's about very inexorable, nearly indefatigable energy. I hope that, I'm putting that out as another possibility. Again, this is all speculation, conjecture, because I don't know the actual cause of death for him at this time. Transit Pluto was also making an opposition, if at least a loose one, to his natal sun. So what it tells me is that it could have been a death that he might have really not seen coming, and this is something that happened very spontaneously. It also is a possibility. You're talking about when transit Pluto is opposing the sun. Remember that the sun can be about life and our vitality. Pluto can be connected with death. It's associated with obliteration and destruction. When Pluto is opposing it, that sometimes can manifest in death in some instances. I mean, you're talking about, you have transit Pluto involved in something very strongly, that it's an indicator where people need to be very careful, whether it's hitting the for example, in other instances, if it's hitting one's 4th, 8th, or 12th house, the houses of endings, when it's conjunct one's sun. If in transit it's making an adverse aspect to one's sun, a square opposition, I would say even an inconjunct, possibly, though an inconjunct can be seen as neutral, but it can, remember that it's also health related as well when you're talking about inconjuncts, and even when you have transits that are hitting your own natal Pluto, like transit Sun opposing your natal Pluto as an example. These are things that you have to understand and look at. And there's also at this time as well, he had transit, and you're talking about Pluto as well. When you have transit Pluto opposing your sun, Pluto also can be associated with issues with could be the bladder, or I'd say even colon, anything that could be Pluto related, the reproductive area, the pelvic area. There may have been some issues with that, and he may have been going through at that time as well. And at this time as well, he had transit South Node in Sagittarius conjunct his Saturn in Sagittarius at this time, and it tells me if he was involved, he may have still been involved in sports, whether it might have been a coach or something. But what it tells me is when you have this transit South Node is hitting one Saturn transit, when you're talking about the South Node in transit, it can be about issues that one may be going away from, and it could have been an indicator that if he was going to be if he was involved, or he was speculating or contemplating being involved in a career in sports, for example, this is something that he may have been going away from, or some responsibility at this time. So those are some ways that this could manifest and pan out. And again, it's terrible. You're hearing about a lot of people dying very young lately. I hope this wasn't a suicide, but no matter how this death manifests, however it actually took place, it's obviously very saddening. A lot of people in the sports world, especially college basketball fans, I'm sure, very disconsolate at this time. And I'm a sports fan. I don't remember him honestly, but again, based on what I read and saw on the internet, he apparently had an illustrious college basketball career. Somebody that will surely be be gone, but certainly not forgotten. I'm sure he left a tremendous legacy at the UConn Huskies basketball team. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.